Well, this is going to work out, but I've never streamed specifically just to YouTube before. I have put out a couple streams from StreamYard, OBS. Well, no, I've never used OBS to YouTube. However, what I want to discuss today over a nice, long, lovely toke is how exactly Maryland is approaching the legalization of recreational cannabis in Maryland. Now, specifically, let's start out talking about what are the parameters around the legalization of the recreational cannabis, which may be surprising to you to know that they're not being as forthcoming and honest. Even the, what do they call them? Company, the industry, what's the word they used for those people that represent the company to the public and shit? Anyway, those people aren't even really giving the specifics because there's certain wording that if legislators say those words or companies spit those words out and let those words be known, people will react in a way they don't want. So, first of all, specifically, as of July 21st, or my birthday is July 24th, apologies. As of July 1st, 2023, recreational cannabis will be legalized here in the state of Maryland. So what does that mean? First of all, that means, well, one of the things that means is that pot like this right here, this, can't really see it well on the camera, but this is grapple pie. I have some pictures posted of it. Actually, the post I put earlier, there was a picture of some grapple pie. Very beautiful bud. This tests at 20%. The recreational market will not have access to this because it is 21%. Because the recreational market is going to be capped between 12 and 15%. Yes, you heard me correctly. The recreational market in Maryland, while I still can't find this in the legislation written anywhere, I know from industry insiders, people that are working in the medical industry that already plan to have their conversion license to sell both recreational and medicinal, that the recreational side of things will be cut and limited from 12 to 15%. And the legislation even states as much about the cannabis concentrate. If you look, you can just type it in Google, Maryland Recreational Cannabis Legislation. I got fruit flies. And you can see that, get out of here, you little annoying fly. You can see that the dabs will be limited to 750 milligrams or that equivalent across 12 grams of cannabis concentrate. So the way that's defined, the way they say or 12 grams, makes me think that either one, a gram of concentrate that tests at 750 milligrams is going to be extremely expensive, or they're just not going to make that available and you'll have to buy smaller potency grams. And for a little bit of, to help you understand that a little better, a medicinal gram here in Maryland, such as what I'm gonna take a dab of here in just a sec, this Black Belt's live resin, it tests at 1,000 milligrams. So, and why does that matter that there's a 1,000 milligram market available? Because what's being shipped into the state from California, which don't worry, that won't be going anywhere because California themselves are facing in 2022, they faced a decrease in legal pot sales, which caused the medicinal or the illicit market to be overrun with pot. Well, excuse me, let me rephrase that. It didn't cause it. The decrease in legal pot sales is due to, in my opinion, largely due to the legalization of cannabis piecemeal across the United States. You have approximately 20 states right now that have legalized recreationally, or even more so that have done some sort of medicinal decriminalization. That cannabis that was being shipped out of California, as California controls approximately 75% of the illicit cannabis trade in the United States, approximately 10% of the worldwide cannabis trade. So the cannabis that was being shipped to these states that are now legalizing and decriminalizing is no longer needed in those states. So it sits in California. which they have to sell it. They don't want to not sell it and make their money, so they lower the street price, which causes competition between the illicit market and the legal market. Because even though cannabis is legal in California, you still have the illicit trade. You still have the truck that's sitting at the bay doors that gets loaded up and taken out of state. And then you have the truck that unloads and puts it in the safe. Whether people like it or not, the government let us into this type of industry, and that's honestly just where cannabis is. So, point being that Maryland doesn't have to worry about a shortage of California 1,000 milligram shatter packs being on the street, because the black market's going nowhere soon, given this legislation. Now, the really funky part of the legislation that gets under my skin a lot is how they're going about equity in the market for individual entrepreneurs like myself, who have advocated for the market during a time when advocacy for cannabis was dumb, stupid, and would get you locked up in a fucking heartbeat, especially if you're somebody who used, smoked, or did something else with cannabis. Most people who smoked cannabis, sold cannabis, did their thing, would not openly admit. Well, for example, when I was in high school, the guys I smoked weed with would literally throw me under the bus in front of other adults and things because they didn't want to be known as a pothead. Like, the stigma associated with marijuana, because of the government pushing it into the Schedule 1 categorization that they did, saying that it's non-therapeutic and causes dependency, it led to the stigma that cannabis has. And that stigma is very, very hard to break. And that, in my opinion, is one reason why the Western world doesn't want to accept at least the institutions of the Western world do not want to accept the viability of cannabis's therapeutic properties. Yet somehow we still have the FDA in the United States popping out fucking 5 different pharmaceuticals from this non-therapeutic Schedule 1 substance that causes dependency. One of those pharmaceuticals being Epidiolex, which is used to quell the seizures and some neurodivergent disorders in children 1 year of age or older. That's a nice little story to tell as well. The Stanley brothers, who were a group of brothers really not into cannabis, they weren't really stoners or potheads per se. They just had botany degrees and a lot of knowledge of how to manipulate the phenotypical expression of plants. So they applied that to cannabis whenever a family came to them and specifically wanted their daughter, who was suffering from seizures from one of the neurodivergent disorders I just spoke of. I can't remember the names of them and I don't want to misspeak, but the Stanley brothers used their knowledge to develop a CBD dominant strain of cannabis, which we now know as hemp. That's what they just colloquially call it now. That is cannabis containing less than 0.3% THC by volume, because this family noted that this was the mid 2000s, 2006, 2007, when they approached the Stanley brothers. So they noted that their daughter, when she was using lower potency THC, because they could tell she wasn't being as psychotropically affected, she wasn't getting as high. So they thought, well, what if this cannabis that's not getting her as high is quelling her seizures more so? What is it if it's not the THC? Because we knew even then that THC is what it was that got you high. But thanks to the FDA disallowing study and peer-reviewed study in particular on cannabis and manipulating said peer-reviewed study that was done via the University of Mississippi, we had no idea really the therapeutic benefit that lay in CBD. And the FDA took that discovery, which in my opinion, and if you look at it from the federal perspective, is an illicit entrepreneurial discovery, stole it and used that to develop Epidiolex, which they then pushed out onto the market in 2017. What's interesting there is when states legalize or decriminalize cannabis medicinally, you have it's like a 3-year blackout period where the cannabis is grown, tested, make sure everybody's up to standards and everything's where it's supposed to be. Magically, that 3-year period took place from the time that the Hemp Act went into place in the United States. 3 years later, you have Epidiolex being pushed out onto the market. But there's no relationship there. That's definitely The FDA did not legalize hemp only so they could produce Epidiolex. That would be silly. Why would they do that? I mean, there's obviously lots of other things we can use the hemp for that they'll actually let us use it for, right? The companies making the ingestibles that are made from CBD, such as Delta 8, they're not receiving cease and desist letters, are they? No. They are, is the point. They are. Because federally, cannabis and all of its derivatives, save CBD, are still considered Schedule 1 substance, except for your synthetic cannabinoids, which they haven't factored into the legislation yet. But if you look back at spice, and I don't know how a lot of people are very don't like spice, and I don't like spice at this point either, because the government took and applied the inherent what happens when you make something illegal, when you prohibit something that society wants. They took the spice, which was very close to a synthetic cannabinoid. It might have been a little more iffy. However, it certainly was not what is on the street today, which resembles end users' methamphetamine. When people take spice today, they act like they just took some meth, and these fucking fruit flies are driving me crazy. Why are there 1,000 fruit flies in here? I know why. I have a litter box over there. Anyways, back to the legislation in Maryland. I know I'm hopping all over the place here. Welcome to my live. That's what happens. I don't have notes. I just go from my head. So now, if you want to get involved in cannabis growth and sales, that's specifically the stuff that's getting under my skin as far as the legislation. That's why I talked about, put in the description, House Bill 516 and 566. In Maryland, those two bills specifically are related to how exactly Maryland is going to go about allowing individual entrepreneurs onto the new recreational cannabis market. Now, again, keep in mind the cap that I just mentioned, the 12 to 15% cap on the cannabis, 750 milligrams in your dabs, as in possession of 750, which means that obviously you're not going to be able to buy a recreational dab costing more than 700, or excuse me, you're not going to be able to buy a recreational dab at a higher milligram than 750, if you can even get that. And as I said, it will be quite expensive. So in order to be part, they're having 2 rounds of lotteries. Yes, you heard me right. They're having a lottery for the poor. Does it surprise you? Because it does not surprise me, not even in the least. They're having 2 lotteries. The first lottery, you have to be what is considered and defined in the legislation as somebody who is in some way associated with the term, the language that they're using is disproportionately affected area. Now, first, we have to define a disproportionately affected area. Maryland will be releasing a map in July of Maryland's disproportionately affected areas, if you're curious, if you live in one of those. Obviously, many of the communities in Baltimore, some of the communities in Prince George's County, the stipulation around the legislation is that a disproportionately affected area is an area in which at least 150% of the arrest log in that area is due to cannabis sales, cannabis possession in some way, shape, or form. So it's due to prohibition. Now, sorry, okay. Apparently it's my live isn't getting out to more than like nobody because there's one person. Anyway, I'm not worried about it. People will see it later on. So that's a disproportionately affected area here in Maryland. In other words, what they're saying is the poor people, because we know that if an area has an arrest log of 150% or higher related specifically, explicitly to cannabis sales, people who are in those areas, poor people who are in those areas, I'm not talking about Pablo Escobar, I'm not talking about the guy at the top who's unloading the boat or driving the boat in. I'm talking about people on the street who are selling cannabis to make money. Those people, the people who are the ones they're referring to as the disproportionately affected. Those people sell cannabis to survive. They're selling weed, yes, to make a better wage than they would be making most of the time in the job place, or to supplement that income, because it sucks out here. Those are the disproportionately affected, which you'll understand why I'm so heated about this when I get into the price points of what they're asking just to partake in the lottery, let alone pay for your licensing after being accepted as an individual who can participate in this recreational cannabis sales, cultivation, etc. Mm. That, by the way, grape pie is grape gasoline. Don't confuse it with grape pie. It's grape pie. It's grape gasoline and apple fritter. Um, Apple fritter, conveniently enough, I have noticed something. This is a little off, a little side note. If you live in Maryland, I've noticed something about genetics of cannabis here in Maryland. For example, SunMed, as well as Kings and Queens, pushed out a batch of apple fritter last harvest. It was like 2.5, 3, 4 months ago, something like that. Now we have grape pie, which is a cross of apple fritter and grape stomper, or not grape stomper, excuse me, apple fritter and which one was it? Grape pie was grape gasoline, and apple fritter. So I just thought that was interesting because I've noted that before in Maryland genetics. Like I've seen strains being sold, and then I see a strain come over next harvest that is a derivation of that strain and another. I just found that in rainbow belts. Another good example. This black belts that I have here, they were doing rainbow belt shatter packs last harvest, 2 gram shatter packs like crazy. Now they have black belts, which is rainbow belts and rainbow belts 2.0. Something I've sussed out among the genetics here in Maryland. I thought because it has to be related to like, and if it's all these companies, either like what's the connection? You know what I'm saying? Like there has to be some tying together factor there that's making that happen because it's across pretty much all the companies that I see this pretty tied together. Which also got me thinking about like how many different ways can you push? Like say if they're like, okay, you're allowed these 4 strains of cannabis, pick 3. All right, so everybody picks their 3, and then like just thinking about all the genetic derivations that you could come up with out of that, it's not really hard to think that that could be similar case happening. Anyway, back to the legislation in Maryland. If you want to become part of sales, processing, working with cannabis outside of the industry, and you have to understand when I'm talking about the industry, I'm not talking about like when you see Mendo Dope in California on YouTube, how they've got their thing and the Pez Bros. Even that's not industry. I'm talking about mass cannabis corporations like Trulieve, Terrascend, Green Thumb Industries, who, by the way, recently got sued by their Chicago, Illinois workers for higher wages and won their higher wages. I'm not sure if Illinois is one of those shitty minimum wage states. It probably is. Might be. I don't know. If it's not, then they definitely have a significant wage there now because here in Maryland, they're paying $16 to $17 an hour, which I honestly believe is a fucking joke because excuse my language there, but I get a little heated talking about that because Maryland increased their minimum wage from $8 to $13 an hour, which seemed like a good thing. But in addition to that minimum wage increasing, the price of everything went up and the cookies got way smaller on top of it. And Americans being price conscious and not size conscious, they don't pay attention to that. They don't pay attention to the fact that the box of Oreos is seemingly just a little bit smaller. Maybe they just shrunk the package. Who knows? People don't note those things. They do, but they just kind of brush them off. As I said, Americans are focused on the price. The price all about the price. So people are thinking they're making more on this market, but you're not. You were. I was honestly making more at 12 than I would be making 16 as it is now. And when you apply that to the cannabis market and the fact that the cannabis industry was supposed to be something different in the state, something that changed up the game in the state, something that made things different for everybody. And they came in and just did the regular capitalist bullshit. The first 15 licenses were given to all rich white men. Those rich white men brought in nothing but massive mega corporations to run over the state and make sure that they were able to control it. And why do I say that? Even though there's supposed to be this equity lottery, which I'm getting ready to discuss, is because even though we're having the equity lottery, and there's protections built into the legislation, such as industries aren't allowed to just submit a whole bunch of applications. It's limited to one application for each license and 2 applications per person. But what's preventing them from having the CEO and whatever the other top people in the company just submit applications like that? Is there legislation that says that it has to be the owner of the company that submits you know what I'm saying? Like, because they work their way around that and just submit a whole bunch of applications, and then the industry gets the licensing and individual entrepreneurs don't get any opportunity at all. If you can come up with the financial hoop that they want you to jump through. Now, remember what I discussed with disproportionately affected areas. It's important to remember that disproportionately affected area, because they do not want to say or relate that to the word less financially literate, or less able, not literate, but less access to finance, poor people, in other words, in layman terms. They want to avoid that wording. This is why you have disproportionately affected area. Remember that. So it's $1,000 for the micro license, and a micro license means you're going to be more heavily controlled by law insofar as what you're able to grow, how much you can grow, all that stuff. I think it's 1,000-foot restriction. Like you're able to grow 1,000-square-foot area under a canopy is the micro license. And there's like 4 or 5 different categories. I should have looked a little closer, took some notes, but they're doing a full license, a micro license, and then, for example, in round 2 of the lottery, it sounds so, it's cringe to say lottery, but in round 2 of the lottery, they're having on-site consumption licenses issued, for example. So those are some of the other licenses that are being issued from round 1 and 2. And in round 1, only people living in disproportionately affected areas are able to apply for the licensing. And again, that's $1,000 for the micro license, $5,000 for the full licensing. Okay, that's for your application submission. That's just to give them the application. And in addition to that application, you also have to submit a business plan, which is no small feat, an operational plan, which is also an endeavor, and then a diversity plan, which, on that note, I understand the diversity plan insofar along racial lines. Especially here in a state like Maryland, you have Western Maryland, which is primarily white people, and you have downstate, which is largely minorities, black people. So I understand and it's no secret that black people were disproportionately targeted for all of the drugs, but cannabis being what it was and used by so many people because it is a natural herb, and that's what's always been said. That's what everybody's always said. It's natural. Like, anyway, it was pretty much used by anybody that used drugs. So they got disproportionately targeted, and you couple in with that the inherent biases of society, blah, 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 all that shit. So I understand applying that along racial lines. However, I think that the diversity part of that's going to get taken in a direction where it shouldn't be taken. That's just my opinion. I don't think those things should be pulled into the cannabis legislation, but they probably will be. If you're wondering what I mean about that, I made a tweet about it earlier. I'm sure it didn't make some people too happy, but opinions and everything, what they are. So after you get through for your you put your 1,000 or 5,000 in, you get to pay them then 10,000 or 50,000, 10 for the micro, 50 for the full licensing, to participate in the cannabis industry. And they have things in the legislation that make it seem as though they're trying to work with people that are low income, people that maybe don't have, maybe not low income, but people that don't have the financial opportunity that somebody has that can just throw out $5,000 and then $50,000. They put in wording like you don't have to have a physical storefront. Okay, well, you don't have to have a physical storefront, which means that you can have your area, you grow, process, all that stuff, and then you can just deliver cannabis. You sell cannabis delivery service, which is cool. That means you don't have to fork out all that money for a storefront. However, the $50,000 entry fee, the $10,000, you know what I mean? Just to participate and maybe get the chance to get your license, you have to pay $1,000 or $5,000. It's like, I don't understand where the thinking was with that. And they touted it like it was this amazing, awesome thing. But the deeper I think about it, the more it seems like what's going to happen is industry's going to bombard it with applications. Not many people's going to get opportunity. The people that do get opportunity will probably be those most deserving, inner city areas. And another issue you have in the inner city areas is how are they going to control, like Baltimore, Prince George's County, like inundating one area with too many cannabis sales people, because that's also something else they were talking about, is trying to spread it out evenly over the state, not just have like everything concentrated downstate, which with the medicinal industry is essentially how it is. We have 2 dispensaries in Western Maryland where I am. So anyways, I find it interesting, the cannabis legislation. I don't know. Maybe not a lot of people find it interesting. And I only have 200 followers on here, so I didn't really expect this live stream. But maybe it'll get some views here afterwards. People will be interested in what I have to say. I just think that the price points, considering that they said they were going to improve the barrier to entry, the financial barrier to entry, yes, they did. It's 10% of what it was. They paid $500,000. They want to charge us $50,000. But nobody has $50,000 to throw at that. So, and I understand wanting individuals, wanting to weed out individuals who don't have the initiative and drive to achieve what they want to do, so that you don't have failing businesses and you're not wasting those licenses. Like, I understand that aspect of it as well. There's a lot to it, but I think that there's other ways to approach it than weeding people out through jumping through the financial hoop, which is really what it seems. And then coupling that with language like disproportionately affected areas and the like. So, hope you have a good rest of your day, everybody. Thank you if you joined me for any time at all. I appreciate it. Yeah, check out my content if you like. Take it easy.